This book is the kind of novel that casts a spell over the reader. A family saga of over 500 pages, it shows in remorseless but fine detail the impact of a changing society upon the individual. The once proud family at its centre has made its fortune in paper production, but they are slowly losing it through the effects of partition, labour unrest, mismanagement, and domestic discord. The novel begins with a profoundly shocking event in which a starving Bengali peasant slaughters his wife and children before killing himself. From this shocking opening, the pressures on the family gradually tear away the bonds between husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, parents and offspring. The novel is told through a double narrative. One strand recounts the brief rise and gradual disintegration of the Ghosh dynasty, comprising 3 generations and their loyal servants, some 20 squabbling people, all crammed into 4 stories of a mansion in South Calcutta, each set of family members occupying a floor of the home in accordance with their standing. The patriarch and his wife occupy the top floor, while their spoilt youngest outcast widow and children reside in the gloomy bottom one. They are unaware that the ground beneath them is shifting as social unrest grows during the late 1960s and early 1970s. This unrest is vividly represented by an interwoven first-person narrative provided by the eldest grandchild, Supratik, who spurns the comforts of home to become a Naxalite terrorist, an action that further catalyzes the decay of the family, leading to a chilling conclusion. No single individual in the household, old or young, escapes the impact of India's turbulent history.
This story begins in Delhi shortly before 8-year-old Ajay and his slightly older brother, Birju, emigrate to America with their parents. It's a delightful coming-of-age story in which a chance event destroys a family's much hoped-for new life, but does not destroy the spirit of a young boy who is very, very interesting and very self-involved, like many young people, very young people might be, but he is slowly developing into a writer as well.
This is a very difficult book to read because it deals with an issue which is, in some countries, politically incorrect. It deals with death penalty and hanging and all these things, but it goes to Meera's credit that she has dealt with this issue very strongly, very imaginatively, and also very humanely. And the story actually is the story of a family, the first hangman family of Calcutta, whose lineage dates back to 420 before Christ. And the protagonist, Chetna, she is a 22-year-old girl. She comes into the job of a hangwoman by default because her sister was supposed to have got it. Her brother is supposed to have got it, but then he got maimed by a grieving parent whose son was hanged by Chetna's father. So it's a very difficult plot, and I just can't really make it very simple for you. But there are many strands which Meera weaves into the story. One is, of course, the visual culture, the importance of television, for example, the dominance of television in our lives. There is a very young anchor, a conniving, scheming kind of a person, very ambitious, very keen to rise to the top. And he comes and makes Chetna pray because she is going to be the first hangwoman, not probably in India, but also maybe in the whole world. And so she is his prey. And so this man, Sanjeev Kumar Mitra, is also her lover. So the plot thickens from then on. It becomes very intricate, full of these conniving, brutal, manipulative exercises by Sanjeev. And Chetana's coming of age. She's only 22. But it's an irony that she comes of age on her own at the expense of one life she takes. It is when she is hanging, this person who's hanging has been long overdue for 14 years, that she comes into the glare of public eyes and discovers herself, and she becomes a charismatic self. In the end, she takes a revenge on this man, Sanjeev Kumar, who had manipulated him by enacting what is called a media hanging. I'll not explain this, I'll give it to you and to find out what this media hanging is. In fact, they had a mock hanging in the media studio where this man, Sanjeev, out of extreme eagerness, falls prey and he's hanged. Whether he dies or not is something which is left to the imagination of the reader. But it is a difficult book, as I said.
"25-year-old Nomita Fredriksson, or Nomi, returns from her adopted home in Norway to Jarmuli, a seaside temple town, on the pretext of making a film about the place, but really to embrace and learn from her haunted and violent past there, including news of her mother, who abandoned her by its sea. As Nomi journeys to Jarmuli on a train, she meets 3 older women who are friends, each of them protective, forgetful, and hectoring in turn, escaping from the drudgery of their domestic lives as they travel to the temple town on pilgrimage. The pilgrimage site, packaged and narrated by the tourist guide Badar, has a dark underbelly that unfolds as Nomi's memory of her childhood does, of child sexual abuse, child labor, and child trafficking. The town seethes with this visceral violence, embodied in the Swami, the albino blind monk, Suraj the TV anchorman, and the bazaar men and boys who hang out at Johnny Topo's tea shop. Making these characters weave in and out of each other's lives, or even just pass one another by, this is a chilling yet compassionate story in a compelling prose that captures a myriad sense, sounds, and visual cues of both landscape and memory, of haunted and lost lives and their desperate attempts at reclamation.
I've chosen this book, or we've chosen this book, for many reasons. It's a love story set in Kashmir at the time when there was even talk of the anti-Indian movement in Kashmir becoming an insurrection. It's a love story, very interesting love story, because it's a love story between a Shia and a Sunni Muslim. It's, for me, one of its great qualities is it describes the awfulness of what went on in Kashmir, in the sense not that it describes individual incidents, awful incidents, but that it captures the atmosphere, the horrid atmosphere that existed at that time. And it also, I think, captures the futility of the whole struggle. It captures the way that the military answer to this problem only succeeds in making it worse by alienating people who were previously not unduly concerned about whether Kashmir should be in Pakistan, in India, or independent. And it also, highly relevantly for today, it describes and makes one think about how easy it is for a young man, the hero actually of the story, who is a perfectly peaceful, brilliant artist and craftsman, to find himself persuaded that he should go across the border into Pakistan to be trained as terrorists. So it reminds us very strongly about the dangers of young people who you would never think and never themselves have thought of becoming terrorists. so because they become alienated.
This novel is composed of several tales entwined and juxtaposed in a single surreal, hallucinatory, and poetically resonant narrative. The book is about urban alienation, imagined in terms reminiscent of Dickens and Kafka. There's even a giant talking cockroach, like in Kafka's famous novella Metamorphosis. And in one of the interweaving tales, a newborn baby named simply Orphan is abandoned on the step of a refuge. Like Oliver Twist before him, an indictment of an uncaring and hugely wealthy society. In another tale, an unnamed, wealthy young man dreams of murder and escape, dreams which haunt the whole book and which create the image referred to by its title of a girl child with a balloon flying up into the sky, perhaps to create another city, a city free of suffering and guilt. Jar's finely crafted book reveals a driving concern for the wretched citizens of the urban nightmare that is modern New Delhi, here called New City, a suburban development of massive skyscrapers, highways, and shopping malls, the home of some of the richest in the world as well as of the poorest, who live where they can, scuttling into corners wherever they find them. The passage I'm going to read gives a flavour, gives some idea of Jar's remarkable writing. Orphan will survive, mapping his own destiny, and assisted by a talking dog and the care of a beggar woman called Auntie, who lives off the scraps thrown from passing lorries on the highway. The dog is called, perhaps not unsurprisingly, Bow, as in Bow Wow.
So many of the books actually really do stand out on their own. And so deciding which ones that you're finally going to nominate for the 11 list is very difficult indeed. I mean, I could have nominated 22 books very easily. So I suppose one really has to admit that it was personal preferences which in the end decided, did I really think this was one of the best reads of the list? Did I really enjoy it? Did I find it was a page-turner? Well, I think some of the subjects they discuss are relevant to that context. For instance, the book about Kashmir, The Golden Leaf, that is hugely relevant in the context of Kashmir and in the context of terrorism in general. It is enormously so. Some of the other ones are also, I think, very directly relevant to problems in South Asia. Jar's book about Delhi, for instance, is a really telling portrayal of the enormous problems of Delhi with its huge unplanned growth, its huge continuing immigration problem of people coming in from the countryside, and the cruelty, the harshness, the suffering that goes on in the Indian capital. So that again is a hugely relevant book. Well, you know, South Asian literature and Indian literature have a very long history. And of course they have a verbal as well as a written history. After all, two of the greatest legend epics in the world, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, come out of the Indian tradition. And long before we had things like literary prizes or literary festivals, there were wonderful writers. And I always think it's very important to stress that many of those writers, of course, were writing in Indian languages. And I often feel that when we think of South Indian literature nowadays, we think purely in terms of people writing in English, which is wrong historically and wrong at the present too. And therefore, one thing I'm very glad about is that in our 6 list, we have one translation. I think what has changed over the years, since I've been in India, is the recognition of South Asian writers is much wider. There were very big names, of course. There was, for instance, V.S. Naipaul. Now, whether you would call him a South Asian writer or not, whether he'd be very angry with me or not, I don't know. But he certainly wrote extensively about that. And then, of course, there was Salman Rushdie as well. There were been others who were famous. But nowadays, I think the awareness of South Asian writers and their global success, if I could put it like that, is much greater than it was before.
I must say that literature does sort of come at a not that higher level as my other work, because that is something I've always been doing for the last 22 years. Literature I just came upon 6 years ago when my friends started the Jaipur Literature Festival. I did read a lot of literature, but that was mostly British English literature and never South Asian literature. So that I started only 5 years ago. But it has become like sort of a crutch for my work. So it's interesting. Because when I read South Asian literature, I really get to understand lives that I'm working with and to understand the nuances of the culture. Why is it that child marriage is encouraged? What actually goes on in people's minds? There was a very interesting book that won, I think, the second year, Narcopolis by Jeet Kayal. And it talked about street children. It talked about the underbelly of a city. Exactly the people we work with. And then drug abuse. And I did understand a lot of why and how of drug users, abusers. So I think it is important, literature. It does help my work a lot. So I do enjoy reading these books. And also the fact that in all our countries around India, the only common language is English. And if I can read about Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka can read about me, and so can Bangladesh and people like that, I can understand them better and I can be more tolerant towards my neighbors. And we can spend our money on things of development in these countries rather than fighting each other and spending on defense. That's what I think we should be doing. So I think like EU, we should also come together, the South Asian region, and there'll be tremendous scope of development in these countries.